Hey everyone, it's Leandri here.
And I'm Bridgid.
And today the two of us are diving into how series and film can become powerful tools for learning English. And I want to start with that age-old question that we always get asked: subtitles. Should you watch films with subtitles? And if you do, in which language?
I'm a big fan of subtitles, Leandri. I use them myself. So I see no problems using subtitles. Sound quality isn't always great, and anything to support you while you're watching, I think's really useful. I think the question more is which language, like the stages of subtitling, I guess, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm sure you've been asked this question, a couple of thousand times. And like you, I watch my films with subtitles. I always joke and say, I can't hear without them. But it does definitely depend on level for me as well. If you're, an elementary or pre-intermediate student, put on those, native language subtitles. That's fine. But after that, start transitioning.
I would say around the B1 mark, start transitioning. And it will depend on the show and the film and whether you've seen it before. I really recommend, especially for lower levels, start with series and films that you've maybe seen before in your own language. So then when you start using English subtitles, it's just not such a massive transition and not such hard work, because films and series should be fun. It shouldn't be homework.
No, absolutely agree with you there. That's why I kind of tell people the same thing, because if you're putting on English subtitles for the first time and you're doing it with, Titanic, which is a film everybody's seen, for example, you know the story, you kind of know what they're talking about, so now you could focus more on the language rather than trying to, figure out what the plot is.
You don't want to make it difficult. I mean, you don't want to make it not difficult, but not enjoyable, because then you won't do it again.
Always makes me think, because, we get questions like this. Should I watch films in English? Should I watch movies? Should I listen to music? Should I read books, etc.? And the best advice another teacher ever gave me about this is, do what you like doing in your native language, but in English.
Absolutely. If you don't read Harry Potter, don't read it in English already. I mean, I know most people do read Harry Potter, but my example, not a good example.
Have you ever read Harry Potter?
Yeah, I'm one of the few people who hasn't. So I don't know how I managed to get this stated out in public so early in our conversation. It's a shame on me. Oh.
Speaking of Harry Potter, though, because obviously we could use this as quite a cultural phenomenon in a film everybody's seen. But what I like about it as well is, it's probably the most popular film we have that really showcases British accents. And accents is another thing we obviously have to keep in mind when, recommending what to watch. So that same question, should I watch British or American shows?
I really just don't think it matters whatsoever. I personally just don't think accents need to necessarily come into it. You watch, again, you should be focusing on watching what you enjoy. I mean, maybe if you've got a job with American colleagues and you feel like you need the practice for that, focus more on American. But if you're watching English shows and films to enjoy it, I personally don't think it matters.
That's absolutely fair. Yeah. So what kind of shows do you like watching?
Because I watch a mix across British and American and Australian and New Zealand.
Just wanted to say, because I've definitely seen a lot of, in the past I've seen a few kind of Australian TV shows, and I think a lot of people don't realise that there's some very good quality work that's coming out of New Zealand and Australia, and I assume you watch more of these shows than I do, so can you recommend any?
If I'm going to say, I mean, in the past, like when I was living in Australia, I watched more. But recently, since I've been traveling and working in Europe, there have been two, they're more like comedy series that have been released on Netflix, which I would recommend. One is called Wellmania, and the star is quite a famous person that people might have seen on Instagram, Celeste Barber. She's a comedian. And it's sort of laughing at the wellness industry, but it's also just a funny story, someone in Sydney. And if you want to get a look at very nice sights in Sydney, I felt homesick when I watched it, actually. I was like, oh, I know that place. Oh, I know that place. So if you've ever dreamed of going to Sydney, it's also quite a nice show. And there's another one called Usual Suspects, which has a few like really well-respected Australian actors and some comedy actors that's also set in Sydney. And it's a bit more of a mystery, a little bit of a crime mystery, but a comedy as well. So I'd recommend those two because they're more recent on Netflix. But I've never seen a South African show, film, anything. So that's where I have a massive gap in my knowledge.
Well, firstly, before I tell you about that, you definitely need to send me some links, and everybody actually some links to what you're talking about, because I think I'm going to go check these out on Netflix. As for South African TV, I'll be honest, I don't know much about South African TV programs, but we have produced a lot of great films that people might have seen, District 9 being the one that kind of immediately comes to mind. I mean, absolutely amazing film. It's very, very good. The same director has done some other things, and recently, actually, in the last year or two, some South African horror films have kind of made some waves. There's one specifically called Gaia, which was really, really good, and actually introduces you to kind of both English and some of the Afrikaans language as well. So if you are a fan of horror, definitely recommend that one.
Not me. I try to stay very far away from horror.
That's fair. Yeah, when you started mentioning romantic comedies or comedies, I thought, yeah, I think the two of us would find it difficult to decide on what to watch on Netflix.
But okay, also, sorry, let me just recommend, obviously, something from New Zealand, because obviously, whilst Australia is my home, New Zealand is my home. And I think a lot of people have heard of Taika Waititi, the director, and he's made some amazing films. Some people might not be very happy with that latest Thor film, but his favourite, my favourite of his film, and one I always recommend to people and students love it, is The Hunt for the Wilder People. It's just such a beautiful film. And generally I've found, like, I've recommended it to a lot of students and they've found it, easy enough to manage. So that would be high on my list.
Okay. I've seen a couple of his films. Obviously, the Thor films come to mind. I know I've seen one or two others, but their names are somewhere in the back of my brain. I have not seen that one though. So I'll watch it and then probably start recommending it to my students as well. But since we're making recommendations, what kind of shows do you think are good to watch? Do you think there is a genre that's better than others?
I'm not sure about that. I think the shows that I recommend usually to students are shows that other students recommend because they say they're able to understand it and follow it and enjoy it, because as a native speaker, it's harder for me to say, oh, that's going to be easier to understand. So if students recommend shows to me, then I usually try and pass those recommendations on. If they say that they're enjoying them and they can follow them and they feel like a sense of achievement watching them, then I think those are the most powerful. And surprisingly, well, maybe unsurprisingly to you, Friends just comes up over and over again. So despite how old it is, somehow there must be people just find it quite easy to watch. Like they can follow it and they don't have trouble with accents or language compared to many, many other shows. I'm not sure if you've had a similar experience.
I find, Friends obviously gets mentioned as a favorite all the time, but Big Bang Theory, I know, pops up quite often as well. I completely agree with you. I've never been able to tell a student who asks me, what should I watch? I've never been able to immediately give them an answer and say A, B, or C, because it obviously depends on what you like watching.
It's what you enjoy, but
yeah. But I find that, in my experience, very often sitcoms make for good kind of shows to listen and watch to, because they're dealing with situations that, well, maybe not as bad, but that we're dealing with ourselves as people every day. So I think the language there ends up becoming quite useful at the end of the day.
I would say the one I hear the most after Friends is The Office, the American Office, not the British Office. Very few people seem to have watched the British Office.
I think very few people know the British Office exists.
Oh, yeah, that's true too. So I would say I hear Big Bang Theory, The Office, Friends the most often. And because I hear people recommend these sitcoms, then I recommend my favourite sitcoms, which are Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Parks and Recreation.
I was about to ask about Parks and Recreation, since, you mentioned The Office, because I believe it's a spin-off.
I'm not sure if it's a spin-off. I don't know if there's any same characters, because I've watched Parks and Rec and not The Office. But
or
the idea
is the same style.
Yes, exactly. But one of the reasons I'd recommend Brooklyn Nine-Nine is because there's a character in there who is like a grammar nerd. And he is very intent on using perfect grammar. And some of the jokes, and one of the running jokes throughout all the seasons, is about him and his grammar and the other characters not necessarily using it correctly. And there's like this one episode where it's part of the actual episode, and when someone gets kidnapped and how they work out that he is being held by gunpoint is because he's a grammar nerd and he never contracts. So he wouldn't say should have. He would always say, you should have done that. And that's how they figure out that he's been captured, because he contracts his words in his sentence, and they know that he would never do that normally.
I know exactly which episode you're talking about, Brooklyn Nine-Nine as well. One of my all-time favorite shows. I actually recently started rewatching it. Okay, we can see where we both are and then discuss our favorite moments. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine now also made me think of another sitcom that I really love, Scrubs, which a lot of my students have mentioned as well. Also because you have such a wide range of topics that it actually touches on. So that's another good one, I think.
Many years ago, when I was still teaching in Australia, I was teaching a Cambridge proficiency class. And somehow we all agreed, I don't know how it came up, but every Friday afternoon we would leave the classroom and go to the entertainment room and watch 1 or 2 episodes of Scrubs. And that was part of their proficiency exam training. So I definitely support Scrubs.
Oh, that sounds like a fun way to learn the language. Wish they did that at school. Showed us episodes of Scrubs or Pokemon, since we were a bit younger. Now, we've obviously mentioned a few very iconic shows here. Friends, like you said, that keeps coming up, and I think so many people, know kind of the jokes and the phrases that come out of it. But what about you? Have you ever kind of picked up any phrases that you use from TV shows?
I have to say, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank there. What about you? Have you?
My sister and I have this running joke that, whenever either of us has some food and somebody wants to, or I'll go to her and I'll go, "Could I have some of your food?" That she'll just look at me and says, "Joey doesn't share food."
Oh, I love that.
That one's become a bit of that one's become a bit of a joke in my household.
I think when I'm having a little bit of a Brooklyn Nine-Nine phase, I might use some phrases from there. But thinking about language, and maybe inappropriate language, I've been surprised and kind of relieved, I've never had to explain anything, how many people, coming back to British shows, how many students have said that they love Fleabag and have watched Fleabag. And in some ways I'm quite relieved, because I feel like I would never have to teach some of the language that probably comes up in Fleabag.
I watched, I think, the first 2 episodes of it. Was one of those things that I told myself I'll get back to. It will happen eventually. But obviously also knowing kind of the subject matter that it deals with, I am quite lucky that I've been able to avoid, for most of my career, I think, discussing that kind of language.
And so I'm quite happy if students are watching Fleabag, they can learn it there.
Yeah, we say watch episodes, use subtitles, but when we tell somebody to go watch something in English, what are they actually learning?
I think all aspects. I mean, there's always going to be a cultural element, because a language is part of a culture. So you actually just generally learn about a culture. You're going to hear intonation and the pronunciation, because I always, when I watch Spanish shows and Korean shows, I always use English subtitles, because I like to hear the natural intonation and the pronunciation of the characters. So even though I can't understand Korean, I have in my mind already an idea of, should I study it ever in my life, intonation and pronunciation and exclamations. I think that that's really helpful, that those sort of natural short little answers, tag questions, intonation at the end of sentences. I think that's what you really get from hearing it in English.
Yeah, I think, because I know I've had a lot of students come back to me during class and say, hey, I was watching blah, blah, blah last night and I heard this phrase and I thought it was cool, or can you tell me how you would use it? And I really like when that happens, when these kind of little cultural phrases start popping up. Because, yeah, I definitely agree kind of with culture here. And I think when we go back to that question, British, American, Australian, South African, I would say try a mix of them, because like you said, it'll introduce you to small little cultural differences that I think in this day and age is a very important skill to have as well, just kind of being a bit aware of different cultures.
And also we do use different, there's British slang, there's American slang, there's Australian, New Zealand, South African slang, and of course Canadian. We haven't mentioned, I don't know any specific. I mean, I know some shows are Canadian, but I'm not an expert on Canadian English. But it does give you insight into, some of the specific vocabulary.
I've watched a bit of Canadian TV myself, and especially if, for example, you're like me and you are a massive kind of sci-fi and fantasy nerd, there's quite a few of those that have come out of Canada. I quickly did a Google search, and actually one I want to mention is a kind of a sitcom called Kim's Convenience.
I've started that, but I haven't finished it. You recommend keep going?
Oh, definitely. It is hands down one of my favorite shows, and I think that might also resonate with a lot of people listening to this, because it's also about a family, a Korean family living in Canada, and it deals with a lot of problems about being a foreigner living in a foreign country. So I think there's a lot of that would resonate with people. So definitely recommend that. And then if we talk about kind of go take a look on Google. Like I said, especially if you like kind of fantasy and sci-fi, Canada's quite good at those two genres, I find.
That's interesting. I think also, like you're talking about specific vocabulary or highlighting things, there's quite a few like YouTube channels and websites where you can watch things through them, or they recommend and they sort of guide you a little bit. I think there's a YouTube channel called like Learn English with movies. I think especially if you are at a lower level, it might be a good place to start as well, along with English subtitles, and having a bit of guidance can help.
Yeah, I know there's, and for the life of me, I don't remember the name of the website, but when I find it, hopefully before this goes live, I'll add it to the list as well, because I know there's a website also for learning films with English that actually has some kind of additional information about very kind of cultural references and things like that. And yeah, especially if you're a low level or you're interested in kind of the culture around it, using sites like that to, yeah, like you said, guide you through the process, I think is a wonderful idea. Right. So, any last thoughts?
Yeah, there was just a couple of things. I think if you're really a fan, it's worth, I mean, we watch things over and over. Like we've both said, we've watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine many times. Watch things again. Watch the things you love again. You know, the first time might have been hard, but if it's a film you love anyway, watch it again, because it's only going to help you. And I saw one suggestion when I was just sort of looking into this a bit more. If you really are a fan, write reviews. There's so many review websites, whether it be Letterboxd or IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes. Write some reviews, like put down your thoughts and really engage with the film or the series, and talk about how you feel in English about the show that you watched in English. Obviously that's not for everyone, but it's, you know, something to think about, just as another way of engaging with it.
I have to say that's something I've personally never thought about, so I think that's going to go on the next list of recommendations when I get asked again. I should write more movie reviews now that I think about it.
It was just something I read somewhere, and I just think it's definitely not for everyone. And there's going to be the kind of person who writes them anyway in their own language, but it's just another way of, you know, getting into it, I guess.
I think that's a lovely little bit of advice to end off with. Like you said, it might not work for everyone, but if it does, why not? So, we've spoken a bit about subtitles, accents, rewatching things, especially. Everybody go rewatch or watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think, is the moral of this conversation.
And another one, I'm not sorry, can I just interrupt? Another one that quite a few people have talked about that I've heard in classes this year, well, because the new season came out recently, is Boys.
Again, a show that I'm very good at starting series. I'm not that good at finishing them. Another one I started watching because I'm a big fan of Carl Urban, generally. And I really liked the first few episodes, and it is something that I do want to explore a bit more. But also, yes, one that many of my students have recommended as well.
And obviously, I'm going to recommend it because the two leads are New Zealanders, so I'm all for it.
Two leads?
Yeah, Carl Urban and... Oh, now I've just forgotten the other guy. The other guy's a New Zealander as well.
Carl Urban and the other guy.
Yeah. That doesn't help, does it?
One little joke that I just want to add in here quickly is, I saw something about this on the internet a while ago. It's like, if you don't know if a film is sci-fi or fantasy, if Carl Urban has long hair, it's a fantasy. If he has short hair, it's a sci-fi. So make of that what you will. Okay, and I think, there we go. I think we've discussed everything we needed to. We went to a lot of different places, mentioned quite a few things, and we'll make sure a list comes out with this. But I'm sure everybody noticed that we did not mention Christmas films. Bridgid, would you like to tell us why?
We're going to do a Christmas New Year special in a couple of weeks, talking about all things English to do with Christmas and New Year, which will, of course, include films and not so sure about series, but definitely films. And so, yes, you'll hear our suggestions for Christmas films in a couple of weeks.
There we go. So everybody tuning in, thank you very much for listening to our little conversation. Bridgid, thank you so much for chatting to me today.
Yeah. And I think later tonight I might watch another episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah, honestly, I might do the same. I'll get my sister in on it and we'll watch some popcorn and just enjoy the show again.
Okay, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks so that we can discuss all things Christmas.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Everybody have a fantastic day, and from myself and Bridgid, goodbye.